Hey guys, it's Liv here, bringing you guys our Arceus tier list video discussing the Arceus of the BBL Season 7 format. So, first off, if everyone enjoyed the video, of course, leave a like down below if you do enjoy. Subscribe if you want to see some more. As I said, we have discussion videos all week. We decided to change out the Yveltal and Arceus for a core discussion tier list. So I know it's going to be like all tier lists for the first four, so I'm sorry about that. I think it was just the best way to convey my points. If I find a better way to convey the other points, I will. The round one pick one, I might actually be able to convey somewhat else. But this was definitely the easiest for at least the Ubers and the Arceus Form. So I do hope that, of course, you guys will understand. And with that said, let's get into this. So for anyone who doesn't know, the BBL has always had an Arceus clause ever since Season 2. It has changed over the years, but of course it has still always been a thing since Season 2. Shout out to the 4 Arceus season we had, where we allowed Arceus Ice, Fire, Grass, and Bug, and all 4 went drafted, and they all happened to be on most people's schedules 4 weeks in a row. So it was a very bad Arceus season, to say the least. They were all very similar Arceuses. Besides Bug, they were all common Arceuses, and then Bug was like an SD Arceus typically in most games. So it definitely did not help the fact that they were very similarly played. So most people played like 3 weeks of Calm Mind Arceus into 1 week of SD Arceus. It was like 2 weeks of Calm Mind, 1 was SD, then back to Calm Mind. It was very, very annoying though, because most of the people who played in Arceus played 4 of them, and it sucked. I had one and I didn't like using it anyway. It was very unfun mon to use. I like Palkia a lot more. But since Season 2 though, we've had it, and it's changed a bit. Between 1 to 2 Arceus depending on the season. This season we're back to 2 Arceuses, and they just cannot be from the same tier. So for example, let's say a Platinum Arceus. You can get 1 Platinum Arceus and you get 1 Gold, and the other person can get a Gold Arceus. Technically, I guess if you want to get really typical, like a Bug, like an Arceus Bug and an Arceus Fire can go. If you wanted to, never mind, that couldn't work. But let's say like a Platinum Arceus can go and a Silver can go, a Platinum and a Gold could go, or a Gold and a Silver can go. Not to the same team, just as a whole, those are 3 combinations. Also, 1 Arceus could go, I guess, from each tier, as long as only 1 Arceus was drafted total. So like, let's say if Arceus Dragon was the only Arceus drafted in the draft, that's obviously fine, because you're not going to require someone to take an Arceus either. So with that said though, I'm going to go in tier order for these Arceuses. Not necessarily in order you see them on your screen, but I think it's best to go in tier order for this, because that way then I can cover it based on the tier and the viability within that tier. So we're going to start with the Silvers. The Silver Arceus include Bug, Fire, Ice, and Grass. I felt like these were the weaker Arceus forms. There was a case made for Rock at one point, but Rock Arceus was ultimately decided to be out of this tier, because imagine having a 100% accurate 120 base Rock move that's very, very bad. That's very bad. A lot of teams do not like that, especially in tandem with Earth Power. Hits teams really, really well. So we did not like that, which is why we opted out of Rock. I know a couple people did actually ask about that, which is why I clarified it. I did want to mention though that we did obviously discuss it. So first up, we're going to do Arceus Grass, which I believe is this Arceus right here. Now, Arceus Grass is a weird one. I think Arceus Grass is definitely one that can be drafted. Basically, the way we're doing this is Arceuses that are broken, these should always be going. Should be drafted is, they could definitely maybe pass, because again, only 2 Arceuses out of the 14 can go at all. So that does clearly dissuade certain Arceus forms. Oh shit. I just realized as well that this Arceus tier list is 18 Arceuses. So you will see some, I'm going to already put those into a special tier real quick, that I'm going to pause and you'll come back to for the not allowed Arceus forms. Okay, so real quick, now that we're back, we have Fairy, Normal, Steel, and Ground, all of which are in the banned tier. These should be pretty obvious. Arceus Ground being like the reverse of Arceus Rock, except for it has a really good defensive typing and offensive typing. Ground in general is just extremely spammable, and having a 120 base special ground move with no drawback is pretty terrifying, especially when you also had the physical options to it. So we deemed the Arceus Ground was too broken. Arceus Fairy, while it's like immunities to half of the allowed Pokemon, we felt like it was pretty broken. Also, a really good offensive and defensive Fairy. It could pretty much run Mono Fairy in most matchups. It's just like better Zern in our opinion, especially the fact that it also has reliable recovery, where Zern lacks that. Arceus Steel should be pretty obvious, but it's just like Fairy, except for the fact that it's also immune to Toxic. So it's again pretty broken, especially when Arceus did lose Refresh this generation, which does definitely hurt. I also realized I lowered this column, it should be above. And then finally we have Arceus Normal, aka E-Killer, aka Super Dumb Mon. You obviously, if you've played any sort of National Dex Ubers tier since Gen 7, or Gen 8 obviously, where the National Dex specifically was a meta, you can clearly tell that Arceus Normal has fallen off a bit because of Marshadow, but only 1 Marshadow at most can be played, and also you can adapt knowing it's coming. So all 4 of those were clearly ban worthy. Arceus Normal is arguably like one of the best mons, if not the best mon banned. Maybe like Zacian Crown or Calyrex Shadow could give it a contest, but I still don't think they necessarily do. But Arceus Grass though, definitely can be drafted. I think this is a weird one though, as I mentioned. It does have some certain good matchups. Just as a defensive grass type, it's a really good Zygarde switch and a good Zygarde hard counter, to be honest. So this is one I would definitely pair with Zygarde Complete, actually. I think it's a really good pair with Zygarde Complete if you can get it. Especially since Zygarde, for some reason, just doesn't go early. Now, Zygarde Complete is potentially going to be Platinum by the time that the season actually starts. So I do want to mention that, of course. But I do think that if it is a Gold Uber, this is actually a cool Arceus to pair with it, personally. As I said, it's like the only Arceus that actually really hard counters. Ice is a good option still, but it is the only one that truly is like hard walling Zygarde Complete. So I do highly recommend it personally. It also does have some good matchup against some other Ubers, like for example, it forces a Fire move and Groudon, and even then it still does 2 hits from it. So it does have some good matchups to say the least. I do think it's just lackluster in comparison to the Silvers. Next up, we have Arceus. I believe this is Arceus Fire. Arceus Fire looks just like Arceus Fighting. I'm gonna mix it up. I think this is the Fire. I think this is Fire because Fire looks like that. Fire, I would put in don't draft. From experience, do not like this mon. I can highly say that I do not think this is that good, especially when a lot of Fires that are in the more defensive camp do have the option to run Boots, and even offensive Fires can. Arceus Fire no longer can, and also the fact it doesn't really check a lot. Sure, Fire typing is a cool offensive typing. It does just in general hit a lot of steals, but there's no real good berry besides like Magearna. I think this is a cool option on Magearna, but I don't think it's justifiable enough, especially when there's a better Arceus than Magearna, actually. But in general, though, I don't really like this Pokemon a lot. I don't think it's that good. As an Arceus, at least, it's obviously a good Pokemon because it is an Arceus, but as an Arceus specifically, it's really not that good, and I couldn't really justify it personally. Next up, we have Arceus Bug. This should be Arceus Bug, I believe. Yep, because the other one's electric that looks similar to that. These are very hard to tell. They're very, very similarly looking types. Yeah, so this is Rock. This is, where's the other one? This was electric. This is Bug. Okay, so Arceus Bug. I think Arceus Bug is also don't draft. It's just a worse version of Fire. I will say that the Arceus Bug on like Fire does have certain good matchups, like in Psychics. However, I do think that Arceus Bug is an extremely hard mon to actually make work for an Arceus. It's a cool one if you like don't mind running SD every week or like just 4 attacks every week. But I really couldn't justify possibly recommending this Pokemon out personally. Next up, we have Arceus Ice. I believe this is Arceus Ice. This should be Arceus Ice. Yep, this is Arceus Ice. Arceus Ice I actually think should be drafted. If you're going to get a Silver Arceus, this is the one to get. Now, I personally do not recommend any of the Silver Arceuses over a Gold or a Platinum. However, this Arceus is better than a fair bit of Gold, in my opinion, for its value, especially because you could pair it with something like a Zygarde Complete, Magearna. This is the one I think is better than Magearna. It's also really good with stuff like Blazikins as well, because while I think it's an awkward pair with Blazikins, it's able to be a really good ground killer. It's able to also just run Bolt Beam coverage and handle a lot of good waters that way. It's able to wall a lot of them pretty easily. Whereas let's say Arceus Grass does against certain offensive waters have to risk certain ice coverage, or maybe like certain flying coverage depending on the water, though I don't think waters that really get good flying coverage unless you're running like Bounce Gyarados, which just still obviously lose to T-Bolt from Arceus Grass. But in general though, this Arceus does handle grounds and a lot of things better for Blaziken, Magearna, etc. than Arceus Grass or Fire would. It also handles a lot of dragons with really well just stab 120, no misjudgment, which is great because you pair it with a T-Bolt and you're going to maul a lot of different teams with that. So in my opinion, this is the best Silver Arceus to get. It should be drafted if you're going to get a Silver Arceus. Next we have Darkius. Actually, no, we're gonna do golds. Right, gold. Okay, so gold Arceus consists of Arceus Dragon, Electric, Fighting, Psychic, and Rock. These can only pair with the silver, whereas the other Arceus that we did just mention can all be paired with silvers or golds. So definitely something to keep in mind in the viability of these Arceus forms. First up, we're gonna do Arceus Dragon. Now, Arceus Dragon is a cool Arceus. I think it's a really good one. However, I'm going to put this in can be drafted. While it does match up really well against a lot of other Ubers, the issue being is a lot of other Ubers are dragons. So you're going to get a lot of other dragons in the format, most likely, pretty easily, to be honest. And a lot of other dragons in gold, I think, arguably have more diversity to them. Whereas Arceus Dragon is a bit weird because it's just a lot harder to fit on, and I couldn't really justify it over the niche that other typings have. However, I will say this is better than anything in silver by a long shot. I just think it's a bit weirder of a one to draft because if you're looking at other silvers that you would, let's say, want to pair this with, Arceus definitely in general would appreciate, let's say, Giratina Origin, but this one doesn't really pair that well with it. It could definitely pair well with Zama Crown, actually. I think this would be a pretty terrifying Zama Crown core. in general, I think it's one of the scariest you could really get with that mon. Otherwise, I mean, the cores just get really weird with this Pokemon in Silver. So this is one of those few golds I'd actually consider just getting solo if I was to get it solo, but it does pair well with certain things. Like Mega Metagross is another cool one. Naga in general, as I mentioned in the last video, is a really cool Dragon Spam Uber in terms of pairing with another dragon, and this is another cool one that you can pair it with. However, the speed is so similar, I don't know if I would necessarily recommend it, because it's 120, 121, though to be fair, Naga at least has options in certain matches to run a speed boost to get him. This has like none, so it's definitely a different case, even though they are so similar. But there's not a lot of Ubers I'd really pair this with. The only other one I haven't mentioned yet that I would consider would be like Genesect and Mega Kang. But again, a bit more awkward pairing to say the least, though. Arceus Dragon is still such a good Pokemon. It is never a bad idea to draft this thing. Next up, we're going to get into Arceus Electric. So Arceus Electric is another weird one. Just like Ice, I think it's just a scuff version of Ice because this has basically the inverse where I can run Ice Beam plus a 120 pace Judgment. However, the issue being with Electric is that Electric Judgment hits a lot worse than Ice Judgment does against a lot of these Pokemon. So I'm going to put this in Can Be Drafted as well. Again, Bolt Beam coverage is so good. This thing does still have really nice Combine, Dual Attack, Recover. It's just, in my opinion, a less valuable Ice, though objectively speaking, it's a better Mon. Just because it has less options that are gonna like fuck it over, because it's really just ground typing and grass typing to an extent, though again, Ice Beam will be really, really good against a lot of teams. However, Ice has to worry about like fires, fightings, rocks, steals, etc. But I still think that for the tier that Arceus Electric is worse, though as a Mon, Arceus Ice is worse. So it really just depends, but I do think it's pretty much just like the gold equivalent, in my opinion, proportionally. However, I do think that is less valuable in gold just because, again, there are a lot better gold mons that I think are a lot more valuable, and pairing one of those with, let's say, an Arceus Ice, I think would be a lot more terrifying of a core than pairing Arceus Electric with, like, let's say, a Dialga or a Giratina O, or even, like, Urshifu, Kyurem Black, etc. Well, Kyurem Black would actually be really scary. If you pair this with Kyurem Black, I think it would be a terrifying core. Next up, though, we have Arceus Fighting. I believe this is Arceus Fighting. I'd put this in Don't Draft personally. There are objectively better fighting types in both Platinum and Gold, in my opinion, that just severely outclasses Pokemon. Things like Marshadow, Mega Lucario, even Zama regular to an extent I would pair, just because, again, you could pair it with another Arceus form, or just other Pokemon in Silver that I think appreciate fighting type more than, and also the fact that, again, Zama Crown can run a choice item, both Band or Scarf, that Arceus cannot really do it. It's forced to run Fifth Play if you want to run it, which does, again, hurt its versatility. Whereas, again, Zama Crown has those other options, and it's also bulky enough to run a weakness policy, to be completely honest, which is, again, another thing you can't really do with Arceus Fighting. So, personally, in comparison to Arceus in Gold, I would not draft this thing. Next up is Arceus Psychic. This is another one, again, I wouldn't draft for the same reason I wouldn't draft Arceus, the same reason I would not draft Arceus Fighting is just because there are better Psychics. Most of Platinum is really good Psychics. There's 3 Mewtwo's there, there's Lunala there, there's Calyrex Ice there, there's Lugia there, all of which are definitely more valuable. So this is, again, another one. If you want a Psychic, there will be plenty left, most likely by your draft pick. Don't get Arceus Psychic. It's pretty lackluster. Next up, we have Arceus Rock. I'm going to put Arceus Rock purely based on matchups. It can be drafted. Though, again, I would not recommend getting it. I would not recommend it at all going. Mostly just because of the fact that Arceus Rock is still a pretty bad defensive typing. However, the Edge, as I mentioned, was just really good, and it will match up against a lot of things. For example, Ho-Oh, it'll match up against pretty much any of the Dragon Flying types, because there are a few of them, such as the Rays, the Mega Salamences, etc. Even just in non-Ubers, there are a lot of good ones. But it also matches up pretty well against things like Ice Rider, for example. You can just go for 120 Judgment on that. You can go for it on a Veltal. And then even just for the electric, for the ground option, for example, you have that against Mega Blazekins, you have that against Dialgas, etc. So this is a pretty good option. However, I would personally not get any of their golds for their value. However, the 3 golds in Can Be Drafted are all objectively better than Ice. I just would not get them for the value because I think the Ice cores are scarier than the gold cores with the gold Arceus and the silver, just personally speaking. But again, it's all up to interpretation. It's just opinion based. I do think that the Arceus Ice in Silver is more valuable than the Arceus forms in Gold, but it is an objectively worse mod. It's really just matchup based. Finally, though, we're into the Platinum Ubers for Arceus, and we have Dark, Flying, a Ghost, Poison, and Flying, and these are all really terrifying Arceus. If you want an Arceus form, get one of these. These are all, objectively speaking, really draftable Arceus. None of these are in the don't draft category. I think you could make a case for any one of them. I'm going to start weakest to strongest. Actually, no, I'm going to start with just in alphabetical order. We have Arceus Dark first. Now, Arceus Dark, actually, I would put in the broken category. If you want an Arceus, I would get this. The only time I would not guess Arceus Dark is if a Veltal is around, and then I would get a Veltal, because I think it's just a lot more malleable in certain matchups. You can make it do whatever the fuck you want. Whereas Arceus Dark, it's somewhat predictable, but not really, because you could still definitely you can definitely make its coverage fit whatever matchup you need. Arceus Dark as well, being able to wall a lot of the Ghost, Psychics, etc. is really, really good for it, because a lot of those are top Pokemon. However, this is a big however, unlike with things like a Veltal, for example, you do risk certain things such as not having momentum, which means if a good fighting type comes in and you weren't able to fit a good psychic option on your team, you're no longer able to actually just get momentum and gain on that fighting type coming in. To be fair, this can definitely must pass a lot of things very easily. I think this is definitely one of the best Platinum Ubers. However, I do think this is worse than a Veltal by a slight margin, because it's also a bit harder to fit a good, like a perfect moveset on this. The Veltal can typically do it because its offense with Oblivion Wing is just so spammable, and also the typing with the dual typing is a lot better here than the single typing Dark, just because of the fact that it also does hit a lot of things that would threaten Dark types, like the fighting types, for example, with the dual flying. So I do think Arceus Dark is definitely one of the best Arceus forms. Personally, I would probably put this as second best, but I would probably tie it at second best just because of a certain other Arceus that I'm going to mention in a bit. Next up, though, we have Arceus Flying. This is an Arceus that I think should be drafted. If you're not going to get one of the really, really broken ones, and you want to, let's say, just get some other really good Dark type, there are a lot you could pair with this. Don't sleep on this just because I put it in should be drafted. The 120 no drawback flying move is disgusting, and the fact that it's also just immune to ground, which is a really good case for, let's say, ground, for example, is really, really helpful. I do rate this Pokemon very highly. However, I think of the Platinum Arceuses, this would personally be tied for the weakest for me. Not that it's bad, but I do think it is tied for the weakest for me, by a very slim margin. Tied with another one, which I'll get into in a bit. However, I do think that Arceus Flying is still a really, really good Arceus form personally. Mostly just for the fact that, again, the no drawback flying is really all you need. Flying is such a good offensive option. It's really hard to actually switch in on because your steals typically don't have recovery, and the ones that do, you can obviously run coverage for things like the Scarms, you can run T-Bolt for, you can run Earth Power for the Solgalios, etc., etc. Hell, even Flamethrower for the Mega Scizor. So I do think this is a really good Arceus. However, it is one that I definitely do think is not as good as other Arceus forms, just based on Uber's matchups. That's the only reason. I do think it's a really good Arceus as a whole, but against other specific Ubers, I think it does definitely fall a bit flat, especially when you can only get, again, one Platinum Arceus as a whole. Not just one person could draft a Platinum and you could draft another Platinum Arceus. Only one can go, as I mentioned, because you can only get 2 per tier for the entire draft board. So I do think that Arceus Flying in that regard is a bit shafted, but I do still think it's a very good Arceus. If you do want to try it, I would highly recommend it. Arceus Ghost is another broken Arceus. I do think this is a very terrifying one, to say the least. Arceus Ghost being able to just offensively handle Psychics really well. Also would outpace a lot of Ghosts. The only ones that don't outpace it naturally are it doesn't outpace it naturally are Marshadow and Mega Gengar for Ubers, which does offer a lot to it, of course. It means you can definitely adapt your set to maybe Calm Mind Up before they attack you, or even just attack them first, which is great. This also helps for Darks because you can definitely run coverage like Brick Break for Darks. However, I will preface though that because of the fact that, of course, Judgment is a special option, that does obviously hurt because the fighting options you get, I believe, besides Focus Blast, are all physical, which isn't horrible because you could definitely still run like Brick Break or Focus Blast. However, it does make it a bit harder to use. In general, though, I do definitely think that Arceus Ghost is a really good Uber. I just think a Dark is slightly easier to tweak into certain matches because you're not forced to run a 70% accurate move to cover your weaknesses. Next, we have Arceus Poison. Arceus Poison, I think, should be drafted. It's a really good one. It's definitely not able to get Toxic, which is great. It's just scuffed Arceus Steel. However, Poison is definitely a worse defensive typing overall. Still a great T-Spike immunity, but when none of the actual really broken Pokemon get T-Spikes, the only Ubers that get it are Grens and Naga, if I remember correctly. So there's not a lot of really broken T-Spikers anyway. It hurts its meta viability, though it is still a really good typing. Obviously, there are certain non-Ubers like Pex, for example, that are very viable here that could definitely T-Spike and be very scary. Also, things like even just Mons such as Tentacruel that can get T-Spikes, or maybe Quillfish that can get T-Spikes for the non-Ubers. It is still good for that reason. However, I do not think it is as good because of that purely because of the fact that there's no really broken T-Spiker, so there's no really broken Pokemon to absorb T-Spikes from. It is still a good poison immunity though, especially when all Arceus can get refreshed right now, but I do think it is highly overrated personally. It is still a good Arceus, still great for like a Xerneas check, but it's just not as good when a lot of the mons are Psychic types. Objectively speaking, it just will match up worse. Arceus Water, final mon. We had this one unbanned this season, along with, I believe, Ghost was also banned last season. I genuinely forget. But Arceus Water, this is the first season besides AG we actually allowed it, and I think it'll be very interesting, to say the least, what it does, because we've never really actually seen this thing perform ever. However, I do think it does have certain good matchups. Things like Groudon, for example, it can definitely handle. Water plus Ice actually hits a lot of things pretty effortlessly. So I do think it's a pretty good Arceus. I'm curious to see how it will perform. I don't know where I'd put it, but I think if I had to put it right now, I'd probably put it in Broken. Because of the fact that Defensive Water is a really good typing still. Even without Refresh, this is a really good Arceus. Honestly, this is one of the few Arceus I think that could truly like run wild with a Rest Talk set, because it's very hard to get a water immunity. And if you run like Rest Talk, Calm Mind, and Judgment, it can honestly muscle past a lot of grasses. I do think it's a really cool Arceus. I would definitely recommend getting a really good flying type with this Pokemon though. Maybe something like a Corviknight, let's say, or a Torrent T would be really, really cool with this Pokemon. But it's very unexplored territory for BBL, and I'm curious to see how it actually does perform. So hopefully you guys did enjoy the Arceus tier list. I know it was a lot shorter, but there's like a third of the mons total, so it was objectively going to be shorter. If you guys did enjoy it, leave a like down below. Tomorrow we're going to be doing the non-Ubers round 1-2 picks, so hopefully you guys do enjoy that. And with that said, it's been Liv. I will see you guys later. Until then, peace out, guys.